By profession, I'm a hospital CFO. I don't know if you know what that means, but it means I'm the executive in charge of Crispy Frog organs. And I have a great time with it too, by the way. That tells you something about me. We're going to talk about monkey business, and when I use the term monkey in this talk on human evolution, the ancient ancestor up to us, I'm not talking about literal monkeys. Okay? I'm using the term to refer to our ancient hominoid or hominid ancestors and that progress up to now. So when I say monkeys to man, that's what I'm talking about. So don't misunderstand that I'm saying we evolved from a literal monkey, because we didn't come from a monkey, but, well, we'll talk about the source in a little bit. Well, let's get after it. You all know the story of evolution. Primordial ocean full of chemicals. The chemicals started to bounce together, and they formed amino acids. Or maybe they formed something else. But if they formed amino acids, they would have formed this kind of a group of chemicals, this being a phosphate group that distinguishes the amino acids. Amino acids become proteins, or do proteins make amino acids? I'm not sure which, but one way or the other, the chemicals turned into these things. And these chemicals turned into increasingly complex forms of life we call cells. How that happened is not really clear, and how these chemicals could progress into such incredibly complex forms from nothing under the mindless direction of chemicals bumping into each other in a primordial ocean is not understood. But within these cells is DNA, a very complex program that governs the operations of the cell. And the DNA is kind of like this computer program. This is something I wrote in a Lotus macro language. It's a very high-level computer program, which does not mean it's very complex and it takes a lot of brains to handle it. What it means is that it's very high level. It's more like English, easier to deal with. Kind of like our talk tonight. It's not going to be extremely technical, like when Ed Boudreau or the other scientists are up here talking. We're going to be talking at an extremely high level, things that I can understand and relate to you. But if you take this computer program and pull out one little character, the whole thing comes crashing down. That's how complex this sequence of information is. So all by themselves, chemicals created one of the most complex sequences of information in the world, and then began to evolve into greater, more complex forms and codependent systems as well. Like this circulatory and respiratory system, they're codependent. They would have had to develop at the same time in order for the being that this works in, for that being to work. What's the statistical probability of codependent systems like this evolving by pure chance? Goose egg, 0. See, I'm a finance guy. I understand 0. 0 means nada, okay? That's nothing. If you have nothing on your bottom line at the end of the month, that's bad, okay? The chance of these things evolving is 0, nothing. It couldn't happen. But that's the story. So it boils down to this. As one wise man said, you start with hydrogen gas, which is an odorless, colorless, and tasteless gas that if you give it enough time, it will turn into people. And this is the sequence, they say. Okay? I think Gish said that, right? So you have hydrogen gas, and it exploded in the Big Bang and flew out everywhere. And this gas, through some kind of not clearly understood gravitational process, created stars. All this gas condensed down into intense gravitational fields. The stars started to burn. And the atomic furnace of the stars, all the elements of the universe were created. The stars died and they exploded, spewing all that material all over the place. That material condensed into clouds and gravitational fields and things and created planets. Now you got planets from burning stars that have all the elements or chemicals we need to make life. On Earth, we were fortunate to get water. That was a good thing because now the chemicals are dissolved in the ocean and you have the primordial sea and the means for the chemicals to bounce into each other to start creating the sequence of life from the amino acids maybe to proteins or proteins then creating the amino acids, but you need the amino acids to make proteins and proteins make amino acids. So how that works out, we'll let the evolutionists explain. So they created different forms of life leading up to these little lemur and tarsier monkeys, who then created, somewhere from one of these guys, our common ancestor. And from the common ancestor came these guys, the orangutans, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, the baboons, and ultimately, the epitome of human evolution. Man himself. Isn't that a wonderful thing? I maintain that if we did come from monkeys, that's as good as it gets, okay? Doesn't get any better. So from one single living cell came all of life. That's the story of evolution. And within this process, over the last 600 million years on Earth, you've seen the geologic column. You start from the very basic, simple things, the non-invertebrate marine life, up to the increasingly complex creatures, the lizards and the age of the dinosaurs here in the Mesozoic. And then you get way up here to the top in the last few million years, the Pleistocene and the early Pliocene. Then you have this common ancestor developing and beginning that hominoid, hominid to Homo sapien evolutionary process. In the last 3, 4, maybe 5 million years. It depends on who you talk to, what kind of mood they're in, what they had for breakfast, how they're feeling, you know. So the time frame changes. Now, this process is a spooky one because human evolution, and I should mention too, what I'm talking about came largely from 2 books I read. These here, Bones of Contention by Lubenow, and if you don't have this one, you need to get it. An evolutionist wrote this, and he does a very effective job trashing evolution. He's a great storyteller, and I highly recommend this book. It's written by William Fix, called The Bone Peddlers. And I am told, it was published by Macmillan Press, who publishes college texts, and I'm told that the colleges told Macmillan they better stop publishing the book or they won't let them print their textbooks anymore. And then I do have a large collection of paleoanthropology textbooks that I've read various portions and chapters of over the years. So I've read a lot of the evolutionary stuff, and then these 2 books for the other side. So that's the source of where I'm talking about. And this quote came from Lubenow in Bones of Contention. Human evolution allegedly took place in the past over vast periods of time. Evolutionists readily admit that evolutionary processes work so slowly that they are not observable over the lifetime of one individual or even over the successive lifetimes of hundreds of generations. In other words, there are no direct observations or experiments that can confirm the process of human evolution. So it is something that we can't see, we can't test it, we can't experiment with it by admission here. So how can we really tell if it's happening? The question is we can't. And in the case of monkeys to man, there are certain processes or thought processes that a paleoanthropologist goes through to line up fossils to substantiate this monkeys to man theory. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to look at some specific fossil evidence, particularly one that my brother-in-law personally told me when I was talking to him about creation, that he rejects creation because of this particular fossil. He's going to ride right into hell on this guy. We're going to talk about that one. And there's another guy that we're going to talk about who already has slid into hell because his faith was in a fossil that was subsequently proved to be an out-and-out fraud. But how can you tell if something's happening? It's a predetermined thought process applied to things that you find. And also tonight, you're going to get to see the world unveiling of a special sequence of fossils that I discovered myself in Wyoming. I call them the utensilines. And by showing you these fossils, first of all, Brian, I'm going to forego my usual $25,000 fee for discussing my unique fossil discoveries, okay? This is going to be on the house because this is the world unveiling. But in the future, once word of my find gets out, I will get $25,000 fees and 50% of the gross. And if you want to know what gross is, wait till you see the fossils. Yeah. So how do we know that this is happening? So this whole story, I feel, is more fairy tale than science. And you know the fairy tale. You take a princess and you take a frog and you turn it into a handsome prince, and that is a fairy tale, and we tell our kids it when they're young, and we don't expect them to really believe it, but then they grow older, and we tell them if you take the same frog and add 3 billion years, you can get the handsome prince and forget the princess, you don't need her. See, I don't know a guy in the world that's going to believe you don't need the pretty princess, but that's what we tell our kids, and we call it science. And this is crazy. It makes about as much sense to me as this Florida presidential election ballot. I'm sure all of you remember that mess, right? Years ago, when